What we do here is go back.
Everyone, and welcome to How History is Done. And today we are going to take a look at the TNReady EOC review. And this is going to get you ready for the end-of-course review that we have with a multiple choice here in a couple of weeks. And you all should be ready to fire on all cylinders after we get through with this review. First, we're going to get ourselves into the rise of industrial America. Now, we'll go ahead and pull myself on over here to get out of the way. At the top of each era that we have, I'm going to have the presidents. So, first president we have, the rise of industrial America, is going to be Ulysses S. Grant. Next, I have Rutherford B. Hayes. Here's James Garfield. Here's Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, Grover Cleveland again, and William McKinley. Now, here's the thing about this. James Garfield, this gentleman right here, he is assassinated, and William McKinley also assassinated, and we will talk about that here in a little bit, when they were assassinated and what were some of the actions and repercussions that happened because of it. These presidents are also going to be the presidents during the Gilded Age. I've tried to break it up for you all to be able to understand it a little bit better. And so today, as we talk about what the rise of industrial America is, we will talk about our acronym that went along with it. So we had BAR. Remember, it's business, agriculture, and racial tension during this time. So let's move on over here to our business leaders of this time. These are either known as robber barons or captains of industry. One of our first gentlemen that we have is John D. Rockefeller, one of the very, very first billionaires that we had, richest man in the history of the United States. John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil. Andrew Carnegie, this gentleman was a steel tycoon. He wrote The Gospel of Wealth. We have right here a guy by the name of Alexander Graham Bell. We all know that he started or invented the telephone. Thomas Edison, an inventor of many, many things, most credible, the light bulb and the phonograph and others that were too many to mention. I mean, Thomas Edison invented well over 1,000 different inventions. Went on to start the General Electric Corporation as well. Here is our railroad tycoon by the name of Cornelius Vanderbilt. As we go on down, we have our meat producers and our meat shippers. This is Gustavus Swift. Gustavus Swift is the man that created the refrigerated railroad cars so he can keep his meat fresh for longer. And then we have Philip Armour. Philip Armour is the man who canned meat. So just think about canned meat, that he put an armor around that meat to get it protected. Another fellow that we have, this right here, is J.P. Morgan. He is our banker. J.P. Morgan, being the banker, was also one of the guys that helped out as we go through the Cleveland administration. This second Cleveland administration, as we'll talk about later, that helps bail out the United States. What we wind up here underneath this with the map, we're going to talk about the natural resources here in the United States. Natural resources are all around. Pittsburgh is the home of steel. Around Ohio was like the Texas of that time, where a lot of oil was there in Ohio, and a lot of iron ore was all around here in what we call the Midwestern states. These gentlemen right here, they took themselves, a lot of them used some of the materials that we have in our Midwestern states to help make the riches that they have. During this time, of course, we have some racial tension, and we have some other things here in the state of Tennessee. So after the Tennessee Constitutional Convention of 1870, we start having a disenfranchisement method that goes out, or we have a poll tax, $2 poll tax. The Constitutional Convention of 1870 says African Americans can vote, but you all will have to pay a $2 poll tax, and this will help limit them from being able to vote. Jim Crow laws are instituted here. You've got your restrooms. You have whites only and your colored only as we go through. And we'll take a look at that. These are Jim Crow laws. Other things about disenfranchisement methods here. We've got two platforms. And we've got where you have your African Americans and you have your white as well. Memphis Martyrs. In August of 1878, we have our yellow fever epidemic that kind of breaks out during this time. So we have around 25,000 people from Memphis, Tennessee, that go ahead and leave this area due to the fact that they're scared for their life. Our very next era that we have, of course, we do have the Gilded Age, also from 1866 to 1890. These two time periods are time periods that will encompass all of these presidents. Once again, we have Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, James Garfield, Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, Grover Cleveland again, and William McKinley. So underneath this, we talked about the IC gold. We had immigration, corruption, and gold are the main themes that we have to go along with this era. So with our immigration, we've got immigration quotas that come out through this time. There was this thing called nativism. If you remember nativism is an extreme hatred of immigrants that come in. The Chinese Exclusion Act is also around this time, where we try to exclude all Chinese men and women into our country. Of course, here's the political cartoon that will help you out with it. Jacob Riis and Jane Addams. These are two that were helpful with the immigrants. Jane Addams and her Hull House that we have, she helped immigrants to be able to give them jobs and teach them and whatever that needs to be done for them to be able to assimilate. Remember, to make same through this time period. Jacob Riis wrote the book How the Other Half Lives, and showed pictures of how the immigrants came to live in slums and other places during this time. So we have our immigration that we have. So we also have some corruption that went along. Under the Grant administration, we had a little bit of corruption that happened with the whiskey ring. This was around St. Louis, and where the extra tax from whiskey taxes that were added went in to line the pockets of some of the representatives and senators, and there were lots of people that were involved. The other one that we had revolves around the Credit Mobilier scandal. And the Credit Mobilier scandal was a construction company from the Union Pacific Railroad, and this construction company was supposed to be able to build the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, and they priced it too high for this. They built the railroads curvy in order for them to be able to produce the most amount of miles. So they got paid by the mile, not by the hour or by the job. For that, the federal government got took with this Credit Mobilier scandal. Also, let's see here, we've got, James Garfield, under his presidency, he winds up being assassinated. Garfield's assassination by a guy by the name of Charles Guiteau. Charles Guiteau assassinated him because he wanted a job. And because of Garfield's assassination, we get the Pendleton Act. And the Pendleton Act comes out of that saying that you must be hired on merit, not about who you know or your political affiliation. Other different types of corruption, we have a guy by the name of Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed was the leader of Tammany Hall. It was a political machine there in New York. And Boss Tweed, his number one nemesis was a gentleman by the name of Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast was a political cartoonist who drew lots of different types of images that would try to expose Boss Tweed as we go through, and we'll see about that. We have gold and gold crisis as we continue on with our situation. Gold and silver strikes during the late 1800s. As we know that during the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, we take silver and what we do is we add it to our general currency. What this does is it lowers the value of the dollar. And as it lowers the value of the dollar, and by this, our dollar becomes worthless, our country goes almost bankrupt, and Grover Cleveland, in his second administration right here that we have, he has to bail us out and say return back to the gold-only standard. Now, because of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, you have a gentleman right here by the name of William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan is a man that wrote a speech called The Cross of Gold. And here's a political cartoon. This is someone that drew William Jennings Bryan here. And this is a golden cross. And it said, you shall not crucify. In his speech, it says, you shall not crucify a man on a cross of gold, saying that he himself wanted to have silver to be able to back it, our gold standard, and back our money. We come to find out that we know that that was not very good for our economy as we have. Another guy, as we get ourselves kind of together here, we've got William McKinley. We know that he also is assassinated a little bit later. I know it looks like it's another day. I've changed my shirt. It should be our fun day. I've got my Explorer shirt on there because we're all pioneers. Now, what we're going to look into is the Progressive Era. So the Progressive Era, we've got our presidents that are located right up here at the top of the screen, just like every other slide that we're going to have. So the Progressive Era, as I've told you guys, it's the equation. We said workers, women, World War I, blacks and businesses, and the Spanish-American War. So as we get through here with this equation, and as we take a look at it, we'll take a look up here and go with our president. So here is William McKinley. We see that he winds up getting shot, assassinated, and then he is then replaced by his vice president, Teddy Roosevelt. But in order for us to be able to understand how Teddy Roosevelt came to power and where he fits here on the spectrum, we've got to take a look at our imperialism and how that works. So imperialism is something that is kind of new here for the United States. We're a growing nation, and we believed in manifest destiny, saying that God told us to go west and for us to be able to expand our ideas and our morals throughout the West. But it doesn't end at the Pacific Ocean. And so we start to see that in this small little island country of Hawaii, we send New England missionaries down there for them to be able to spread the word of God. And as they're there and they go and they start to live and they find out that there's pineapples and things like that, fruit and sugar that they can sell back to the people of the United States. They start making money and they become very, very rich as they do so. And this is one of the very first forms that we have of our imperialistic nation. We are there in Hawaii. They write back and forth, and then they start to sell these things there. And so the people of Hawaii, they say that they could make more money if they could trade with the United States or even be part of the United States. So they overthrow Queen Liliuokalani there and in Hawaii, and they set up their own form of government. A guy by the name of Sanford B. Dole of the Dole Fruit Company is the guy who's kind of in charge in Hawaii during this time, during the late 1800s. And so as we get into our imperialistic nation and the things that are there, we want to try to get more natural resources, raw materials and things like that. And we also find out that there's a country called China that's out there, and China has all sorts of people that we could sell our products of the United States to, which goes back to our big business people and all that. So, and we, as we go through and we talk about all the things that are happening, our imperialistic nation kind of goes, it hits the culmination there with the Spanish-American War. And the Spanish-American War really kind of revolves around the country of Cuba. And Cuba is right down here in the this political cartoon that I have. I've got Uncle Sam, and he's kind of spreading the arms there and trying to putting his arms around Cuba. And so Cuba wants to get its independence from the country of Spain. And Cuba has something that we as the United States want, and that is sugar, and cheap sugar it is. And we in Cuba, they are out there. They want us as the United States to try to help out with this Spanish-American War. We have some guys by the name of William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer that are back and forth. These guys are known as yellow journalists, and yellow journalists. These are guys that are exaggerating truths that are there, and they kind of get the ball rolling. The Spanish-American War kind of gets started when the United States, we have the USS Maine that is sunk in Havana Harbor. It's a short war, only about 4 months long as the war is. There was another battle in the Philippines, and then after the war, what we have is the United States has control of Puerto Rico, which is right down here next to Cuba. We have Guam. We have the Philippine Islands that we took from the Spanish there after the Spanish-American War. Now, the one key thing about this is Cuba is not under the control of the United States. We have the Foraker Act, the Teller Amendment, and the Platt Amendment. These are all laws that have been passed that kind of says that we really control Cuba, even though they're their own country. We can control them economically and kind of get into all the things with there. So we are there, and so as we're here in Cuba, we've got a guy by the name of Teddy Roosevelt. He and his Rough Riders kind of go on San Juan Hill. He becomes a national hero because of it. And William McKinley runs for re-election of President of the United States. And because of his re-election, he wants to get a war hero as his vice presidential candidate. And so he gets Teddy Roosevelt, this guy right here, Teddy, one of our favorite presidents we like to talk about. So Teddy, he goes through, and he and William McKinley, they run. McKinley is successful and wins re-election, and Teddy Roosevelt is his vice president. A little while later, Teddy Roosevelt becomes the president because William McKinley is shot. And Teddy Roosevelt then brings on his own ideas here into the United States, which really kind of ushers in the actual progressive era as we saw. So imperialism kind of sparks Teddy Roosevelt's career, gets him going there. We wanted raw materials and things like that. So Teddy Roosevelt has his square deal, which is fair for everyone. Okay, we got four sides and it's all square, so we have it fair for everyone. And we see that he goes in and he starts to attack businesses, which this goes in under the workers' side of our equation for the progressive era. So we have people that are out there that are called muckrakers, people like Upton Sinclair, who writes The Jungle, and Ida Tarbell, who gets ushered in with the progressive era with Teddy Roosevelt. And so we've got these people that are out there that are muckrakers, people like Upton Sinclair. He writes the book The Jungle. We have other muckrakers that are writing, or they're drawing political cartoons talking about pickled sausage. You got like a bug or something coming out of there in order for this. So the workers, that's where we're kind of focusing on right now. So the workers here of the United States and monopolies and trusts. And so we have the very first anti-monopoly act that we have is the Sherman Antitrust Act. And the Sherman Antitrust Act at first was meant for unfair practices there for them to be able to be shut down. At first, this is used on unions and instead of the actual businesses themselves. And Teddy Roosevelt and the Square Deal, they kind of go in there and he recognizes these muckrakers as what they are. And as he recognizes these muckrakers as what they are, we start to see that industry gets changed. All because the book The Jungle, Teddy Roosevelt goes and he winds up signing in the law, the Meat Inspection Act, the Pure Food and Drug Act. These are things that happened there, all because of the reading and the cleanliness of the food. Ida Tarbell, she goes and she exposes our guy, John D. Rockefeller, and kind of the cutthroat tactics that he has. And so she's there. Lincoln Steffens goes and exposes some of the political machines and the corruptness of our cities and all. And so we have these people, and like Robert La Follette, he's a muckraking governor from Wisconsin that kind of busts up all the things. And so Teddy Roosevelt, he's there. He does his thing. He's swinging his big stick. He uses big stick diplomacy there for the foreign policy. He uses his big stick here, again, in monopolies, trying to bust those up and trying to show everything that he can do and flex his muscle on the Square Deal. And another one of the Square Deal things that he talks about is his actual conservation that he has. So conservation was also a big thing. Because of Teddy Roosevelt and the conservation, we get Yellowstone National Park and all the other national parks that we have, all because of the conservation. Yosemite, that's what I was looking for, as we see. So as we kind of go on, we've talked about the workers. We've talked about the Spanish-American War. Let's talk about African-Americans and kind of what they are and their role here is in the progressive era. We have this gentleman right here that I'm circling around. This is Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington is a civil rights leader of his time, and the guy sitting right next to him is also W.E.B. Du Bois. And Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, these guys, they had different approaches on the way that they need to go ahead and handle race relations during this time. Booker T. Washington, he says that we need to go ahead, African Americans need to learn how to work a trade and work in with the other whites, especially in the South. If they were to be successful and to see change happen here within the United States, that we needed to work together with the white people. And one of Booker T. Washington's, his Atlanta Compromise, he talks about how that the white men should be able to employ the African Americans instead of looking for immigrant labor, because we had been there for longer. So his counterpart was W.E.B. Du Bois, and so W.E.B. Du Bois, he's a Northern guy. He is a Harvard graduate, and so he's all about education. And one of the things that W.E.B. Du Bois uses, he talks about his talented 10th, which is the top 10% of most African Americans, and those are the ones that are going to have some change. And so as we get into these things and we talk about it, so Booker T. Washington, and as he talks about his talented 10th, and as we kind of go on, he talks about education and how that we should go ahead and fight for the rights that we have right now, and we should be educated, and that we should stand up as African Americans in order for us to be able to do what we need to do. in order for the race relations to get better. And so W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, they have themselves some differences as they go back and forth with each other. And as they do these types of differences, they disagree about everything that's going on. And so we also will get in and we'll talk about World War I. World War One, it is a big thing that's there. One of the things that brought us into World War One, as we get along and we talk about with the Progressive Era, we have the sinking of the Lusitania. We have the Zimmerman Note. These are things that have brought us into World War One. African Americans, they move from the South to the North, and they start what's called the Great Migration. And as they move north, they find and they take these jobs that are available to where most of the white men have moved away. When they come over, when the Europeans, or when the United States comes over to Europe during this time, we use the expeditionary forces there, manned by John J. Pershing, and they come over. They get the nickname of the Doughboys. They're fighting in trenches in World War One. Weapons and new technologies such as gas warfare, trench warfare, machine guns, tanks are being used. Airplanes are being used in wartime during this time period as we go. So we have our World War One, and we're all brought into it because of Germany sending the Zimmerman Note. We had British propaganda that tried to draw us in, as well as the sinking of the Lusitania. Women's right to vote is also a thing that's there. The state of Tennessee, we have our right to vote, and how that works. Tennessee gets called to special session. As they're there, they get to vote. And then as they get to vote, they are going to vote on should we ratify the 19th Amendment, which allows women to be able to cast their vote. And as it goes back and forth, we have the women, it's a deadlock tie. Should we vote? Should we not vote? Yes or no for it? And there's a gentleman by the name of Harry Byrne. And Harry Byrne is there. He gets a letter from his mother, and he's voted no for women. No for women, no for women, no for them to be able to vote. He gets a letter from his mom. His mom writes him this nice letter. He changes his mind because every good guy, they follow what their mom has to say, right? So Harry Byrne follows what his mom says in the letter, and he changes his vote, and he changes yes to allow women to be able to vote. And so Tennessee becomes known as the Perfect 36. And as they are known as the Perfect 36, we as well as the rest of the United States, that was the 36th and final state to amend the 19th Amendment. And so we played a pivotal role that's there. So looking back up here at our presidents as we close out the Progressive Era, we've got Teddy Roosevelt that's here. Of course, we know he is our square deal guy, big stick diplomacy. Uses his Roosevelt corollary, saying anybody in South America, we're going to whoop up on you if you come here and mess with South America. William Howard Taft, of course, we know that he was stuck in a bathtub, but he used his dollar diplomacy, and he used the United States power with the economics and the dollar itself, and for us to be able to use it and kind of get our way. And then, of course, we have the moral diplomacy of Woodrow Wilson, and how that he wanted peace throughout the world, especially as World War I came to an end. And after the World War I came to an end, we see that the Treaty of Versailles was signed. Woodrow Wilson has his 14 points plan for world peace. And then as we sign the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations gets brought about by Woodrow Wilson. But we as the United States do not join the League of Nations, all because our Congress votes to not be involved. We want to be isolationist. And so as we kind of wrap up and all the things that are there, I know I try to go over the high points as we can for this slide, and we will come back a little bit later and kind of add this together as we go. Hey guys, we're back again. It's another day. Today we're going to get ourselves and look into the Roaring Twenties, and we will take a look at it. So as we've been doing to go along with this, we have our presidents. We have Warren G. Harding right here, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover. All of these presidents of the 1920s were all Republican presidents. And one of the things that we have to look at with our Republican presidents and what that they do and they stand for was the return to normalcy. Return to normalcy was something that they were going to get away from with the Progressive Era, and letting the businesses to be able to run themselves and getting the federal government out of businesses. But to kind of kick off the 1920s, we have to look at one of the amendments that were then passed during this time. So we have the 18th Amendment, which was passed, which was the Prohibition Amendment. This was banning the sale of alcohol throughout the whole United States of America. And by doing this, it's the sale, the transport of all these types of the illegal actions with alcohol. We have to worry about that. So during this time period of the 1920s, and we see that Prohibition is what kind of kicked us off during this time period. It does not actually really deter the way that the economy works and how exciting that this time was. In our background, I have a radio. I know it's kind of hard for us to be able to see it, but there's a radio that's there. It's the it item of the 1920s. But out of the 1920s and the Prohibition era, we see that women start cutting their hair short. We call them flappers. Organized crime, just as Al Capone is seen here, he and his other counterparts here with organized crime, they start moving alcohol, all types of illegal liquor, bootlegging, things like that. And of course, we see the rise of speakeasies. Speakeasies are illegal clubs that we have that were selling alcohol, and you had to have some sort of a special password in order for you to be able to get in there. During the 1920s, under Warren G. Harding and his administration, we also see that there is a problem with scandal. One of the very first largest scandals that we have is the Teapot Dome scandal. And within the Teapot Dome scandal, this is where his one of his cabinet members, Albert Fall, under his administration, took the oil reserves in Teapot Dome, Wyoming, and out in California, and they sold those to private investors instead of giving that oil and keeping it for the Navy. And so that's where we get the Teapot Dome scandal from. So it was Teapot Dome, Wyoming, is where that this oil was there and it was found. So we see that there was a little bit of scandal there. Albert Fall becomes the very first cabinet member ever to be convicted of a felony and sent to prison because of it. During the 1920s, like I said, the radio was hot and heavy. And people were all about going to the movies and listening to all their shows on the radios. Because of all these things on the radio, we see stars, especially in baseball, such as Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, that they wind up getting themselves to be a household name, as well as a college football player, Red Grange, played for the University of Illinois, boxing legend Jack Dempsey, who held the heavyweight title for about 9 years or so during the 1920s. And of course, we have Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh becomes famous, and he is probably the most famous person of the 1920s when we look into celebrity status. Charles Lindbergh is the man. He helps pioneer airplane travel throughout the United States, and also gets it to where that we are pushing the envelope on how that we send mail and other items across the United States. We did it by air. During the 1920s, the consumerism in the 1920s, which is kind of right here what I've got going on. Henry Ford and the Model T, these become more of a everyday item that we see. The automobile becomes mass produced by Henry Ford. More and more people are there, and they are getting themselves together. And by doing this, they're buying up their automobile, their cars. The Model T is the number one seller all throughout the United States. And as I've told you guys once before in some of our lecture that we've had, that there was a lady that said it became between a Model T Ford or a bathtub. And her reason for picking the Model T was that she could not drive a bathtub to town. And so people started buying up a lot of stuff during the 1920s. Jobs were plentiful. There was a lot of money going around. People started buying things on credit, and we see that credit gets us in trouble a little while later. There were people also during the 1920s. We have ourselves a lot of expression. We have expression with our lost generation writers. And as we have our lost generation writers, we have people like F. Scott Fitzgerald and John Steinbeck and Ernest Hemingway. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby. Of course, we have Leonardo DiCaprio and his rendition of The Great Gatsby here in a film from the 2000s. Also with expression, we have the Harlem Renaissance and how that it has came out. We talked about the Great Migration from the World War II era and back in the 19 teens. And so as we see how that happened, a lot of African Americans moved around up north, and there was no other place other than Harlem, New York, which helped to expand the arts of the African American people. People like Langston Hughes wrote The Negro Speaks, and then we have Bessie Smith, who was, the empress of blues and blues music and jazz music and poetry and art. Really, really exploded within the African American community, and Harlem was the place in order for them to be able to give that experience that's there. But even though that we did have the Harlem Renaissance, and there was opposition in the South. The KKK rose up to about 4 million people during the 1920s, and there was a lot of racial tension that happened during this time. Another things that happened during the 1920s here in the state of Tennessee, we have the Scopes Monkey Trial that is really hot and heavy, that battles evolution versus religion being taught in schools, or the teaching of evolution, because the state of Tennessee had a law that says you're not allowed to be able to teach evolution at all, or Darwin's theories. And a guy by the name of John T. Scopes from Dayton, Tennessee, he challenges that with the help of the ACLU. William Jennings Bryan was, of course, we talked about him earlier, writing the Cross of Gold speech and being the populist presidential candidate that he was. He represents the state of Tennessee and on evolution. And then you have Clarence Darrow, which was the defense lawyer who was sponsored by the ACLU. And Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan are there. The whole legacy of all this is that Darrow challenges Bryan and his interpretation of the Bible by talking about how that, the literal interpretation of Jonah being swallowed by a whale, or even Noah and the ark, and especially then, how long ago was the man made, and things of that nature, and that really kind of blew open that case. Now William Jennings Bryan actually won that case, but really, as we look back upon it, this is one of those things that we have that comes back to the evolution and the teaching of evolution within our schools. Now, other things that happened, of course, now during this time in 1929, to kind of round out the 1920s and the roaring 20s, all of this consumerism that we have kind of comes back to bite us in the rear end. We have financial speculation to where people take out loans and they go and they buy a lot of stocks, with the money that they've bought with these loans. And they continue to think that this bubble is going to continue to get larger, and people are making money in the stock market. But as we see in 1929, when Black Thursday and then Black Tuesday was when it finally there. Black Thursday had happened before the stock market crashes a little bit. It gets propped up a little bit by people the richer people keeping it afloat. But by Tuesday of the next week, it just falls apart. Millions and millions of dollars are lost during this time, which then we usher into our very next. We usher this into our very next era, which is the Great Depression. Let me kind of get myself out of the way here. So the Great Depression, we have our presidents that are up there. We have Herbert Hoover, located right here, and we have our hero, champion of the all presidents, I guess you could say, because he was elected to a record 4 terms, was FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So as we get ourselves together, and we'll take a look at it during the Great Depression, when it first starts, Herbert Hoover was our president. He was our guy. Herbert Hoover was someone that was elected as president, did not have a lot of political I guess you could say prowess that's there, wasn't elected to many offices, or if any office at all. And so Herbert Hoover becomes his president. He takes it. The stock market crashes, and he goes on, and he does help a little bit, or he tries to help, but he doesn't help a lot. Herbert Hoover was a believer in rugged individualism, and rugged individualism was one of these things where he did not believe that the federal government should help out people when they were in need, if they needed some sort of type of aid financially. So Herbert Hoover believed in rugged individualism. And so because of the stock market crash, and we also have, not only that, we have overproduction. So I've got this picture right here of all these Model Ts just sitting in this warehouse. We produced so many things during the 1920s that the consumer could not keep up with. So they were constantly pushing out more and more and more and more of this item. And because you push out more of these items does not mean that you're going to have people to be able to purchase it. And because of them taking it and taking a look at it and not being able to buy it, you see that you start losing money, because you can't have no one can buy it. Because no one can buy it, the company that made it starts losing their money. And as they start losing money, the first thing they do is start laying people off. People start losing their jobs, and then the whole economic cycle kind of goes back over again, because you cannot buy it, you can't afford it, People lose their jobs because you don't have a job, you don't have enough money to be able to afford anything. So the economy itself becomes very stagnant, and it falls and it falls and it falls. The unemployment rate really starts to plummet. 1933 was probably the lowest of the or the highest of the unemployment rate, which reached around 25% unemployment during this time. So when you think about 25% and what 25% actually means is you've got about 100% of the population here in the United States. Okay, so you take 100% of the population, 25% of those are people that can't work. 25% of those are people that the first 25% is people that can't work because they're too young to work. The other 25% that can't work, those are people that are retired or they're physically unable to work anymore. So you have that's 50% of the population. So when we get in there, and that really means that there's only 50% of the population that we can look at. and from a worker's standpoint. So with 25% of the 50% of the population that can actually work, we had basically half of our people were out of a job in the United States during the Great Depression at the lowest that it was. There's lots of things that we'll kind of lean back to figure out what it was that caused the Great Depression. We can look at overproduction. We can look at speculation. We can talk about buying on margin. Margin is right here. Buying on margin means that you want to buy $10,000 worth of stock, and you only have $5,000. So you have to go to someone and you have to ask them to borrow that money in order for you to be able to get that $10,000 worth that's here. Well, guess what? If your stock makes money, you make money. You still owe that person $5,000. Okay, so you're going to take $5,000. Let's just say that you made that the total amount of stock, you earned $2,000 on it. So you're going to come back, you'll have a total of $7,000. You pay the person that you bought on margin $5,000 back there. But guess what? What if your stock falls and you lose money on that to where that you only have $2,000 left of that original $10,000 investment? So guess what? You don't have enough money to be able to make any money off of it. You still have to pay the person that you bought that on margin with that $5,000. So you have that $5,000 that are there. People went broke by doing so, by buying on margin, all because they're playing the stock market. Jobless rates keeps going on up. They keep going up. We start seeing that soup lines start to really to grow. Hooverville start popping up. These are makeshift communities on the edges of towns that were named after Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover believed, like I said, in his rugged individualism. Like I said, if you like depression and want more, vote for Hoover. Herbert Hoover ran for re-election during this time, but he didn't really act like he really wanted it. And also during this time period of the Great Depression, we have the Dust Bowl. So in Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas, these are we have these areas that are hit the hardest because of their the drought that they have. They did not do very well in rotating crops, and they had a lot of drought that seemed to happen. And so on top of there not being any money, the farmers in the breadbasket of the United States, they were being buried by a dust bowl, large dust bowl that was out there. And who are we going to be able to try to help bring us out is the very own New York State's own Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR was a New York governor before he became president of the United States. He brought with him what was known as his New Deal and the New Deal programs. FDR, once he was elected, like we said, we've got New Deal programs just all over the place. A lot of people call it the alphabet soup of federal programs that we have. We've got the WPA, which is the Work Progress Administration, that helped employ artists. They would build government buildings and pay artists in order for them to be able to beautify them. We had the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and in the Civilian Conservation Corps, you've got 18 to 25-year-old men that are working to help deforestation, put out wildfires, work in public or in state parks to build these state parks. And these guys are getting paid $30 a month. And by doing so, 25 of that dollars goes back to their families at home, and 5 of it stays with them. But the federal government is feeding them, and they're doing what they need to. The TVA, of course, that's the Tennessee Valley Authority, and this is the first time that the federal government really gets into a public works. They're in direct competition with some of your private electrical providers that's there. So Tennessee Valley Authority, we electrify the South. They built dams on the Tennessee River. They gave people jobs. We gave electricity to this Tennessee Valley area that really did not have really a lot of money in order for them to be able to do much. And so they do this and with the hopes of helping giving people a job. Social Security Administration, okay, that is insurance for your disability insurance and retirement. The NRA helps keep prices low during this time period. That's the National Recovery Administration. This helps cut this, and the federal government and workers, and business owners that are still actually afloat during this time, they set prices so people can afford them. The Securities and Exchange Commission, this is also something that gets brought out because we have to have someone that will be the police of the stock market. We didn't want a lot of illegal trading. We didn't want to have another big stock market crash that we had where people lost millions and millions of dollars just like overnight. Also, we have the FDIC because bank failures happened during the Great Depression. And so what the FDIC stands for is the Federal Depositors Insurance Corporation. And what this does is it allows for these guys to be able to go in and back federally insure the bank by the federal government. So at this time, I think it's $250,000 per account that the United States government will back up. So if you have yourself an account in some local bank that's FDIC insured, that bank were to go bankrupt, and if you could not get your money back from that bank, the federal government will then go back there and will help out and give you that money back that you deserve. That was your money in order for you to do so. Okay, so today we've wound up reviewing over the Roaring '20s, and we wound up doing the Great Depression as we're here. Hopefully you guys can kind of take a good look and good gander at these, and we will come back later and try to finish up some other important areas. Guys, we're back again. We're going to talk about World War II today. So as we've talked about before, the era that we were there before was the Great Depression, and that the United States and the rest of the world were in this giant Great Depression that was there. And we were trying to get ourselves out of that depression with the federal government programs such as FDR that he brought with the New Deal. But we noticed that that is not going to be the case. So what really does happen, though, is a federal spending program really gets ourselves out of the Depression, and that is called World War II. So as we start to get ourselves up and ready about World War II, and there's lots of tensions that go on throughout the world. Everyone in the whole world was in this worldwide depression. Germany and most of Europe has still not recovered from World War I, or the Great War as they would like to refer to it, and they are trying to rebuild themselves, and by doing so, there are lots of different types of thought processes on how that we can build ourselves up. And we see the rise of dictators and people such as Joseph Stalin here in the Soviet Union, and they became their own communist nation. We have, of course, probably the most hated man in the history of the world, Adolf Hitler, that was there in Germany, and his Nazi party. And the fascist leader such as Benito Mussolini here from Italy. We have Japan and their military leader by the name of Hideki Tojo. And on the outside, we have our other gentlemen that we have that were very important to the United States and to Great Britain. We have FDR, who is our president during that time. Here is Winston Churchill, which was Great Britain's prime minister. He was basically their president. And then, of course, we find out that Harry Truman then is the one who helps us end World War II after the death of FDR. So as we take a look at this era, and what all happens is because we have these fascist leaders and these dictators, authoritarian rule or totalitarianism, which means just one large dictator, what happens is there's a lot of tension that's there. In Germany, their unemployment rate reached 33%, which is almost I guess 75% unemployment if you look at it on the kind of the scale that we did there. So their money was worthless. And Adolf Hitler comes in and he promises them everything, and he helps rebuild that country. And as he rebuilds that country, he decides to really just start taking over the world. And we see that he and Benito Mussolini and Joseph Stalin kind of have a very nice agreement with one another. And so Stalin, and of course he is very cruel within himself, and Mussolini, and they bring up this type of nationalism and pride within their countries. And once you get on this nationalism and pride within the countries, we start seeing that people start building up their military again, and we start having people starting to invade other countries that's there. During this time, too, Japan, they decide that they need to become more imperialistic, just very similar to the way we were in the late 1800s. Japan wanted to try to expand their borders and their boundaries and look for natural resources. And so Hideki Tojo, as their military leader and their prime minister, I guess you could say, or their emperor, sorry, the emperor is the correct term that we needed to talk about. They were there and they were trying to get themselves, and the name escapes me right now, and I do apologize for that. So anyway, as we go, Japan is trying to get themselves more, I guess you could say, imperialistic as they're getting themselves together. We start seeing military buildup all around the world. Hitler starts off by starting to invade Austria-Hungary because Hitler was an Austrian. He wasn't a born German, and so he becomes this. He basically goes and gets Austria, Czechoslovakia, then he goes in and starts invading Poland. By the time we start invading Poland, people are like, all right, we really have to do something about this. War breaks out between all these. France tries to step in, and then they fall quickly. Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler have the Soviet-Nazi pact that they have together, that they're not going to attack each other. Hitler used this as an advantage for him to be able not to try to fight a war on two fronts. And so he kind of keeps Stalin at bay there, and then he sets his sight on Great Britain. And as he sets his sight on Great Britain, Britain holds Winston Churchill and the British, the Royal Air Force that we have. They really hold against the Battle of Britain and the Battle of London there that we have, which was being bombed almost for a completely 1 year that were there. Hitler kind of becomes very bored with that, so then he gets himself involved with Stalin, so he kind of changes his tune. He says, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead, and he wasn't a big fan of communism itself, so he wants to try to take over the Soviet Union. And if anyone is a real history buff and you take a look at the way Napoleon tried to take over the Soviet Union, it does not really work. The brutal cold winters of the Soviet Union really is the, I guess you could say, the ace in the hole for them to try to keep their country alive from outside rule. So we as the United States, during this time of all the stuff that's going on in Europe, we want to try to stay neutral. And we passed the Neutrality Acts during the 1930s. And as we pass these Neutrality Acts, we kind of go on and push and do and see what we can possibly do to try to stay out of it. Now, we start with the Lend-Lease Act, and we have the Johnson Debt Default Act, and of course, in the 1920s, we had the Washington Disarmament Conference, where we said we're not going to build any type of imperialistic ships during this time, and that was between Great Britain and Japan. And so we're trying to stay out of it as much as we can, but we keep noticing that Japan is over there kind of encroaching and getting involved with some of the territories that we have, that we acquired of when we were doing our imperialistic power in, such as the Philippines, which we will see the Bataan Death March that happens there, where the Japanese take control over the Philippines and then the Bataan Peninsula as they take our people capture. They have the Bataan Death March, to where they marched 55 miles down that peninsula to be put in prison camps. And so we as the United States start putting in economic sanctions against Japan. They feel that that's one of those things where it is an act of war, and we really cut off their oil supply. And as we do that, then on December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor there in Hawaii, this surprise attack, killing about 2,400 men. Many of those are still in their watery grave there at the USS Arizona that's down there. And so we are full-blown into World War II. So us trying to keep ourselves, I guess you could say, neutral during this time, we get ourselves hot and heavy. And so during this time, because we've got Pearl Harbor here's our Pearl Harbor attack, we have to set our sights on two fronts of war. Because now, after we declare war on Japan, Germany declares war on the United States, we declare war on Germany and Italy the vice versa with us. Now, it everything just falls apart because of that. So we are at full war as we go through and we do these things. And during this time, we have our D-Day invasion. We start off, we want to go kind of soft at first, and we invade North Africa and head up into Italy. We hit a stalemate there, and then we have to get ourselves ready to go in order for us to be able to have this full onslaught of an invasion. And about 60,000 men on D-Day on the beaches of Normandy there in France, we storm with Great Britain and Canada, and we storm those beaches and take a stronghold of that because we are ready to take back all of Europe. And one of the main helpers on our D-Day was penicillin. Okay, of course, penicillin was to help stop the infections and gangrene during this time. Penicillin becomes a very large help for us during this time period. Once we get ourselves into Europe, and as we kind of go on through, we see that we notice that the Holocaust has happened, and that what Adolf Hitler was trying to do was exterminate approximately 6 million Jews, possibly even more if he could get his hands on them during this time. We did not feel that it was a credible source when we got some telegrams talking about the Holocaust from Germany. And when people that were sending us this information, we didn't think that we had enough information in order for us to be able to attack on an earlier basis. But once we got in there, past D-Day, and once we really started to get into the European continent, we do find these concentration camps and these death camps and these work camps that are there, to where Adolf Hitler not only just put Jewish people, even though they were the majority, there were also other minorities and gypsies and women that were put in there that maybe didn't agree with what that they were his beliefs. So we fought the war on two fronts. We have the European theater and we have the Pacific theater. So the European theater, of course, that's where we are fighting Germany, and now we have the Pacific theater, to where we are going to try to fight the Japanese here in the Pacific. And we come in and we find that one of the best ways for us to be able to try to defeat the Japanese is by fighting this procedure called island hopping. And so we have island hopping, and we go from an island to island, which is very strategic with this island. And so we take each small island as they're there on our way to mainland Japan. The main goal is for us to be able to clear these bases that are out there, so we can then give and start to bomb all of Japan and try to get them to be able to surrender. So we have a couple of main battles that we want to talk about. So in the European theater we've got our D-Day invasion. We have the Battle of the Bulge, which was Hitler's last offensive, and the 101st Airborne was ones that held that line to help them push them back. 101st Airborne in Clarksville, Tennessee. So that's a Tennessee state standard for us there. And we also have the Pacific. We have the battles of Midway, which is the turning point in the war in the Pacific, where we surprised the Japanese. That Battle of Midway is what turned us and got us in the right direction. We had the Battle of Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was the largest Marine war. We have the Battle of Okinawa as we were there, and that was one of the largest battles that we had in the Pacific Ocean. So Okinawa and D-Day were the largest invasions and the largest military buildup that we had for both theaters. D-Day was on Europe. Okinawa was there in the Pacific. So while we're here, we're trying to fight ourselves. We're trying to do what we need to do. And what are we doing on the home front? Well, here in the home front of World War II, we see that we have to have rationing books. And rationing books make sure that we do not take more than what we need in order for us to be able to provide for the war. We ramp up all of our infrastructure within the United States and get ourselves ready to go with our factories. Rosie the Riveter becomes the champion for all women during this time period, to say that they can do it, for us to be able to help out our fellow men that are there. And women in the workforce during the 1940s and the World War II era have really, really skyrocketed. Here's another Tennessee state standard that goes along with it, Avco in Tennessee. Avco in Tennessee was a Nashville-based plant that built aircraft in order for us to be able to ship those over there to our guys. Don't forget about Cornelia Fort, also a native Tennessean that was the first lady to die on active duty in her airplane. 101st Airborne, of course, we've talked about them just a little bit earlier. They're in Clarksville, Tennessee. They were the guys that helped to these were paratroopers that helped us win the Battle of the Bulge. We have African-American units such as the Tuskegee Airmen that are located right about here. And with these Tuskegee Airmen, these were African-American fighter pilots that helped win the war. Another group that we had was the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. I don't have a picture of them up there, but what was controversial about them is these were an all-Japanese military unit, and despite these guys serving their military being all Japanese, what we do especially on the whole West Coast of the United States, we take every Japanese person that we can find, and we put them in detainment camps, and we contain these people, these Japanese people, so we aren't given a surprise attack or anything of that nature. So we were trying to keep Japanese spies that were out there, and this becomes challenged by Fred Korematsu, and Korematsu versus the United States. Fred Korematsu gets himself there for a while. He poses as a Chinese man here in the United States, but they find out that he's a Japanese person. They put him in these camps. He takes it all the way to the United States, but the United States then turns down Fred Korematsu, his court order saying that he was a Japanese American, even though he did not do anything, had nothing to do with Japan. But they wrongfully put him into prison or in this detainment camp, all because of what his race was. Of course, the United States Supreme Court struck that down, and that was never really reversed. Even in the 1980s, the United States apologizes to every living Japanese American here in the United States that were put in those detainment camps and given around a $20,000 reparation check because of it. And as we see that was one of the things that starts to happen really hot and heavy during World War II. Also during World War II, we see the effects of the Manhattan Project and how that the Manhattan Project was built here. Here you go, another Tennessee. I guess you could say account here. We've got Oak Ridge, and the Secret City was a city that was built in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, in order for us to be able to help build the atomic bomb. The atomic bombs were then dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On these days, these bombs were then dropped. They were given by Harry Truman, and Harry Truman was the president, all because of Franklin Delano Roosevelt winds up dying of a stroke there while he's in office. So Harry Truman gives the okay for them to be able to drop the bomb there in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and he seemed to be very regretful by doing so because of all the innocent lives that were then lost. But he knew that this was something that had to happen. Japan was the last ones to be able to, I guess you could say, they were the last ones to surrender. We had Victory in Europe Day, and about 3 or 4 months later, we had the Victory in Japan Day, which means that we won the war over Japan and won World War II to end it up. So that's a pretty much a good